Good. So welcome, everyone. I'm Eleonora from EMPA in Switzerland, and together with Gerald from the United Nations University in Ghana, we will moderate this session on circular economy and life cycle thinking approaches. So just a few words before giving the floor to our speakers. We will start this session with all the presentations, one after the other, and then we will leave space for questions at the end of the last presentation. So meanwhile, feel free to leave your questions in the Q&A chat, so we can pick them up and then start the discussion at the end. After the last presentation, we will show the screen with the voting. So you will see the speakers and the idea of their presentation, and you will be able to vote for the best presenter and also for the presentations that raised most interesting questions. So don't forget to take note of the ID, but it will be shown at the end. So a note to the speakers, please do your best to stay in your 5 minutes, but we will make sure to inform you when it's when the time is almost done. So we can start with the first presenter. So the first presenter is Dr. Stephan Lutter. He's a deputy head of the research group Global Resource Use at the Institute for Ecological Economics at Vienna University of Economics and Business. So Stephan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I fear I'm not able to share my screen. Could you allow me to share my screen? Okay, now it works. Thanks a lot. Great. Can you see my slides? Great. Okay, thanks a lot for the kind introduction. My talk is about an online tool called SCP-HAT, and more precisely about its second version 2.0. The SCP-HAT is short for Sustainable Consumption and Production Hotspots Analysis Tool, and the idea is to provide a tool for science-based policy frameworks in the context of SCP. So very briefly, and I know it's a challenge to present an online tool in 5 minutes only, but the idea is to provide a tool that assesses environmental pressures and impacts at both the national and sector level, and at the same time offering territorial and the footprint perspective in order to allow you to prioritize areas where to start your SCP policy efforts. It's already been used, the first version, for the development of SCP policies in the context of the NDCs and also under the UNFCCC. Where can you find the tool? The link is scp-hat.lifecycleinitiative.org. The tool was commissioned by 3 different UNEP sub-organizations, the Life Cycle Initiative, the One Planet Network, and the International Resource Panel, and it was mainly developed by our research group in collaboration with CSIRO in Australia. The setup is so that the attempt was really to cover as many countries as possible. In the new version, which will be launched in a few days or weeks, it will be covering 164 countries, and there its environmental and economics performance over the last 28 years. There are 3 main parts of it so far. The module 1 is called Country Profile, where you really get for the policymakers, for people who have very limited time and need the key information at a glance. You get the key information on your country in the context of the most relevant policy questions. And this is, as I said, for policymakers, NGOs, and the general public. If you want to go more into detail, you go to module 2 on the hotspots identification, where you have a large variety of SCP indicators to analyze different hotspots of a country and at sector level. This is already for more specialized people like policy advisors or or researchers. And the new parts, which will be launched with the new version, are the standard reports, where you get a more detailed automatized analysis of regarding 3 topics. These are the countries at a glance, where you really get more information than in module 1. You get more specific sector profiles for the country and for the sector you choose, and you get more specific analyses in the context of climate change impact hotspots. Very briefly, what's the coverage of the tool? So far, we had covered raw material extraction, greenhouse gas emissions, land use, and air pollution. And these environmental pressures were translated into environmental impacts via LCA impact coefficients. So into depletion, into climate change potentials, long-term and short-term, into biodiversity loss, and into human health impacts. Now with the new version, we also introduce water consumption and water scarcity. We introduce nitrogen emissions translated into marine eutrophication, and we introduce energy use. And this is further extended by socioeconomic data on value added created, on employment by sex and skill, on final demand categories, the Human Development Index, vulnerabilities in socioeconomic terms, and of course GDP and income. By that means we believe that we can provide information related, directly or indirectly related, to a large number of SDGs. Some of them really, number 12, you really get the data which you need to get an insight into your performance with regard to SDG 12. Some others are more indirect information, right? Ideally, in the future, we would be able to expand the tool towards a more consumption areas type of view. We are now currently working on a supply chain module where it will be possible to really have a look at the specific supply chain of hotspot sectors. And we are also thinking about how to use the tool to become a data hub for countries to insert their own data. Eleonora, I have 1 minute. I see your microphone.
1 minute left. Yes.
Thank you very much. That's good. So that's already my last slide. What has happened turning from SCP-HAT 1.0 to 2.0, and what will happen in the development to 3.0? We have increased the relevance of the tool by increasing the number of sectors which you can have a look at. As I said, we have increased the number of environmental categories. The time series has become longer, and we have introduced the standard reports. We are still facing challenges with regard to data availability. You have to imagine that we'll have to have databases available for all countries in the world. We want to visualize uncertainty of this partly modeled data. And of course, we think about how to best provide user support for the use of the tool. And finally, we are currently advancing on supply chain analysis. As I told you, we are, of course, doing quality assurance and improvement continuously. And we are planning to set up regional centers of excellence where institutions in the different regions can also provide support on the use of the tool. By that means, I leave it with the information that SCP-HAT 2.0 hopefully will be launched in the course of October. I'm a bit cautious with this, but you always have to be optimistic. I also leave you with the link towards the tool, and I really look forward to any question you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan, for your presentation. So our next speaker is Jana Backes. I'm sorry for the pronunciation of your names.
That's correct.
Good. So Jana is a research assistant at the Institute for Sustainability in Civil Engineering at the Aachen University, and her research topics cover life cycle sustainability assessment and its interpretation and weighting, and also life cycle assessment, carbon concrete, and the building sector. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I can also share my screen if possible. Could you maybe help me?
You should receive the permission in a while.
Yeah.
Good.
Can you see my screen now? but not in the presentation mode, probably, right?
Not yet.
Hold on. And we do it again. So now that should be possible. Thank you.
That's perfect.
So very welcome. My name is Jana Backes. I'm working at WTH Aachen University, and today I will talk about 10 principles for life cycle sustainability assessment, and to get us all on the same level, or at least a little bit on the same level. We start with what is life cycle sustainability assessment, or in short, LCSA. So LCSA is about assessing negative and positive aspects of environmental, social, and economic impacts of a product or also a service life cycle. And if we see here the figure 1, then we see about maturity and data availability of these 3 assessments I just named. Most of you might know the life cycle assessment, or in German Ökobilanz. And here we see on the green square that maturity and also data availability is so far quite well available. For LCC, which is the economic part, it's a little less developed, but so far okay. And for SLCA, there is still improvement possible, but later on my colleague will also talk about SLCA. So what we discovered is from literature, and also wrote down in different papers, is that there's a lack of the life cycle approach. So not all 3 pillars, which I already named, are assessed. Mainly the social aspects are missing, partly also the economic aspects. Then it seems to be difficult for applicants to select the respective key stakeholders, especially in SLCA. And also the definition of the product utility, which is important for the functional unit, seems to be hard. Then when we come to the end of the assessment, there are potential trade-offs between the 3 pillars, and they are not made explicit and also not communicated. And finally, the interpretation, which is also connected to the trade-offs, seems to be hard. So what did we do? Out of these gaps or challenges, we said it needs to become more easy for applicants to do an LCSA. So we developed 10 principles for LCSA usage or application, which can be seen here in very short. Which is important here is transparency, of course, completeness and consistency. So transparency, explain everything you did. Completeness, please use all 3 pillars. And consistency means, for example, using the same functional unit and the same system boundaries for all 3 pillars. Then the LCSA should also be aligned with the ISO 14040, which is the basis for the lifecycle assessment. Then the system boundaries materiality means that it is for all 3 pillars the same system boundaries. The stakeholders perspective is important also for all 3 pillars, not only for SLCA. And concerning the stakeholders perspective, also the area of protection and the impact pathway is relevant, because if you don't know your stakeholders, then maybe you won't know the interesting area of protection. The product utility is relevant for the functional unit. And when we come to the end of the LCSA, then we need to be very cautious with compensating impacts and also with trade-offs. So these 10 principles were developed especially for a balanced, better informed and fair decision-making in LCSA. And we hope that from that perspective on, easier communication and more use of LCSA in all sectors will start. That's the publication which just came out in July this year. And at this point here, we are very happy if you read the document. It's a short one and come back to us. And we are happy for discussion and further improvement. And in the name of all authors, I would like to thank you here. And we are very much looking forward for further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jana. Even shorter than 5 minutes. So yeah, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. So the next speaker is Stefanie Streit. Stefanie is a researcher at the university in Leoben in Austria, where she's dealing with sustainability in the European extractive sector and revitalization. So Stefanie, you can share your screen now.
Yes, can you see my screen?
Yes, perfectly.
That's fine. So, good evening. On behalf of my co-authors, I'm talking about framing sustainability within the European extractive sector. The European extractive sector faces many challenges. Mineral resources are needed for the transition to a more sustainable future, but Europe is highly dependent on imports. And this is also, this creates also a high supply risk for key materials, for example, battery raw materials. It's important that trade-offs among different goals are considered that are socially legitimized and do not compromise basic functioning of ecosystems. For the extractive industry, it's also important to implement sustainable and responsible practices, but these have to be compatible with company objectives. But these responsible and sustainable practices will also help to obtain the social license to operate, which should not be neglected in the European extractive industry. There is also a research gap because trade-offs are already analyzed on macro level, but not on concrete practices, for instance, mineral extraction. When linking mineral extraction and sustainability, tensions unavoidably arising because, for example, the green energy transition requires more minerals, which in turn impacts the environment. For this reason, it's necessary to develop sustainability practices that identify trade-offs among different dimensions and ways of resolving them. The first step of our research was to capture different stakeholder perspectives. That means we ask what means sustainability in the extractive sector, where are the tensions, and what trade-offs exist. In interest of time, I quickly go through this slide. So the SUMEX project, Sustainable Management in Extractive Industries, deals with these questions, and it is a part of the project to develop a sustainability framework for the European extractive industry and to and the identification of good practices. So the sustainability framework is specifically designed for the European extractive sector, as already mentioned. You can see an overview of this framework below. So it is based on the typical sustainability dimensions, so social, economy and environment. And the first draft was created through the task research and the consideration of existing standards on responsible and sustainable mineral extraction, for example, the IRMA standard for responsible mining. And to finalize the SUMEX sustainability framework, we conducted 30 in-depth semi-structured interviews with stakeholders relevant to the extractive sector and got many interesting insights in the topic. So as you can see, the social and societal responsibility pillar is about stakeholder engagement and workers' well-being and so on. The pillar transforming the economy is considering the European Green Deal and also contains aspects regarding circular economy and the role of and indicators of extractives for inclusive green economy. And the environmental sustainability pillar is about water stewardship, biodiversity, ecosystem services, and so on. So in this
Stefanie, one minute left.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I have to be fast. The three main issues that cause tensions and trade-offs are combating land uses, lack of understanding the importance of extractives, and lack of social acceptance, transparency, and trust. In contrast, circular economy and recycling, harmful air emissions, and human rights violations cause few tensions and trade-offs. So the last slide, the preliminary insights we gained from our research is that there are different interpretations and prioritizations of sustainability and the dimensions, and these unavoidably leads to tensions and trade-offs between the actors. The most tensions are between the social, the local communities and extractive industries, and it's important to create trust and to engage the local community. We also found out that the key to capacity building for a more holistic and integrated application of sustainability is to understand the perspectives. So it's important to be aware of the trade-offs, to negotiate with the stakeholders and find solutions. And it's also important to find solutions and mitigation measures that are not unnecessarily weakening the trade-offs. And we also believe that the SUMIC sustainability framework can help to resolve some of the tensions or mitigate some of the tensions, because it's a framework
I think we lost Stefanie. Okay, it's not just me. Okay, we lost Stefanie. So maybe we can move on to the next presentation. I see, yeah, that she's not coming back. Maybe there's some issue with the connection. Silvina, is it possible to move on to the next presentation while she's still sharing the screen? Okay, that's perfect. So the next presenter is Rose Manka. Rose is a research assistant at the Institute of Sustainability in Civil Engineering at the Aachen University in Germany, and her research topics cover sustainability at different levels, and also sustainability of waste management and industrial processes and climate change mitigation. So Rose, the floor is yours.
So try to share my screen. Which is at the last. I hope that's visible to everybody.
That's perfect. Thank you.
So I can go on. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. And I want to take you through this project we are working on, and which is a support and gives a support on responsible sourcing of lithium-ion batteries, considering the social impact. So I will start by just mentioning the issues related to this work. We see an increase in the mining and refining of these minerals, nickel, manganese, and cobalt, also because they are used in lithium battery minerals. Lithium battery, which is also fueling or supporting the development of the digital economy or e-mobility around. We see there is an increase in the production or development of these products. We know that these materials are sourced from all over the world, so there is a very diverse ramified supply chain. And this is also It can be seen also in the database that we consulted, for example, the British Geological Survey, the US survey also, and World Mining Data and International Manganese Institute. So we wanted to understand all through the supply chain of these minerals, supporting this mobility and digital economy. What are the social impacts? What are at this level the social hotspots that need to be considered in order to identify or implement a responsible sourcing strategy? So we had to carry out this hotspot analysis based on the guidelines, the UNEP guidelines on social life cycle assessment that was recently published in the beginning of, at the end of 2020. And we coupled data and information and guidelines from these UNEP guidelines together with social impacts, or this is social risk from the social hotspot database, in order to identify at country level what are the specific stakeholders and impacts on stakeholders and stakeholder subcategories. This is at the level of mining and refining at country, for all of the production countries of these minerals. So as we said, we base ourselves on the UNEP guidelines, and according to the UNEP guidelines, there are stakeholder categories that have to be considered in any social assessment. And for this particular assessment, we consider those stakeholder categories and their related subcategories, also extracting the data from the social hotspot database. And not just from the social hotspot database, we also considered the risk levels that are recognized by international databases like the UNDP, the slavery, human slavery indicators, and also to harmonize this methodology. What was the output of this? We came up with this interactive map, which evaluated the risk social hotspot at country level for each of the minerals. For example, here you can see for cobalt, considering these countries that are the largest producers of cobalt, we calculated the hotspots, and you can see from the color, high risk, low risk, and medium risk for these countries. The important aspect of this interactive map is that you can zoom in and understand the indicators that were considered and the performance related to those indicators. And this is also important because it's an interactive map that is updated with production, real production data. It's updated also with the risk information that we get from updated databases. So this can be, it's a dynamic tool. And an important aspect, the last part of what I wanted to say is that as this is a hotspot analysis, it's a risk indication of risk. What is important at company level or at product level is that the social life cycle assessment is applied at product level, and then you can compare the results with the hotspots. So a company can understand its performance related to the country common practice. And this is important for also decision making at the level of any company to understand that pathway or supply chain which constitutes responsible sourcing. And I want to leave you with this because we're going to talk more about these type of assessments because the social life cycle guidelines will be launched. Other aspects of the guidelines will be launched on the 7th of December. And also there is the social life cycle conference in Aachen next year in September. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose, for your very clear presentation. So last but not least, we have Jessica Clement. Jessica is a postdoc researcher at Smart City Institute Liège in Belgium. Sorry for the pronunciation. And she researches policies for smart city and sustainable urban transition. So the floor is yours.
So thank you very much. I am going to share the screen. Minimize this. Is it okay?
Perfect.
Excellent. So thank you very much for that introduction. And today I will present a paper called Evaluating the Synergies and Trade-offs between the mining sector and the Sustainable Development Goals. And I have the pleasure to present this paper on behalf of several co-authors who are highlighted at the bottom of the screen. So to provide some introduction and motivation for why we are writing this paper, as you all know, the SDGs by the United Nations have 17 goals and 169 individual targets that all work together to drive sustainable development. And the mining sector, or in some circles, also called the extractive industry, has been recognized as an important way to advance the achievement of the SDGs. However, there are still questions about what areas to prioritize. And so in this paper, we ask, what do the SDGs and targets require decision makers in the mining sector to do? What needs to be changed? And how might, based on current evidence, decisions in the mining sector undermine or reinforce action to achieve the SDGs and targets? Or what relationships must be considered, managed, or optimized? And in order to answer these questions, we conducted an extensive bibliometric literature review where we mapped the synergies and trade-offs between the mining sector and the SDGs. We have two levels of findings, I would say. The first is a more broad overview that is rather normative. So here we're trying to understand what would need to be changed in the mining sector in order to reach certain goals or targets where there is a relevant connection. And we found that 146 out of the 169 targets, or 86%, called for changes in the mining sector. All goals were implicated, and every target within SDGs 1, 4, 6, 7, 8, and 13 were found to be relevant for the mining sector. These are displayed at the bottom of the screen. And so this means they imply changes in the mining sector to ensure that the SDGs and their targets are met. The second group of findings is less normative and more evidence-based, because then after we found these linkages, we went to understand further if there were rather synergies or trade-offs. And here we found 111 targets, or 66%, that had synergies with the mining sector, and 51 targets, or 30%, that had trade-offs. We found several strong synergies with the goals listed here, and this interesting largely overlaps with the previous literature. So that's a nice confirmation there. However, we also note several trade-offs, such as SDG 2 on zero hunger, 5 on gender equality, 15 life on land, and 16 peace, justice, and strong institutions. The reasons that we found for the trade-offs in the literature were due to the competition of land use between agriculture and mining, gender-related disparities, mining impacts on environmental systems and biodiversity, and also the findings that the mining sector often plays a role in initiating and sustaining conflict, and that the mining sector is strongly implicated in illicit financial flows, or IFFs. So to provide some implications and some conclusions relating to these findings, we suggest from the research and also from the previous literature that there are several main opportunities to focus on, notably related to SDGs 1, 6, 7, 8, and 13. And to summarize this into real words, the mining sector can promote economic growth and development that helps reduce poverty and inequalities through safe and decent labor and the responsible use of mining revenues. and also that the mining sector can reduce the energy and water use of the mining industry while being proactive in climate protection. However, it's very important to note that these are just opportunities discovered throughout this research, and that if they are to be realized, they need to be backed by strong coordinated governance actions. And due to the trade-offs identified, we highlight here SDGs 2, 5, 15, and 16 as priorities, and we further provide 3 avenues to focus on. The first is the reduction of competition between water and land use that arises between mining operations and agriculture. The second is advocacy for women in all areas of the mining industry, and this includes indirectly when women are affected through mining communities. And then the final one is attention to IFFs, especially as estimates show that improving mining regulations to mitigate IFFs could actually generate more financial resources than all overseas development aid. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion that will follow.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you for your presentation. So before going to the discussion session, I would like to go to the voting. So you can see in a while, you can see, so this is the voting procedure. So you need to use the ID number of the presenter to vote who is the best presenter and who is the most interesting research and what is the most interesting research presented. So to recap, we have Stephan Lutter with ID 215. We have Jana Backes with ID 244. We have Stefanie Streit with ID 220. We have Rose Manka with ID 241. And finally, we have Jessica Clement with ID 243. So please vote now, and then in a minute, we will go through the discussion session. And yeah, meanwhile, feel free to post your question in the chat. Thank you. So I think we can go to the discussion now. I'm just sharing the question in the chat from the WUVA platform, also here in the Zoom, so we can all the speakers can see. Gerald, if you want to take over.
Thank you very much, Eleonora. So time flies. I think that we have just about 13 minutes to end this session. I would have loved to ask a question to every presenter. Let me ask one and then move on to the questions that are in the chat for the panelists, for the presenters to answer. I think that these are very general questions, so anyone can actually go. But my question specifically goes to Jessica. I think you actually ended. I was sort of struck that SDG 6 did not show up in the trade-offs. For somebody like me who lives in Ghana and where we have a lot of talk about illegal mining, how illegal mining is actually polluting water bodies, I was sort of struck that 6 did not show up in the trade-offs. Is there any explanation for that?
Sure. Well, the best explanation that I could give is that we looked at the targets individually and we assessed the literature if we could find evidence in a paper or also the gray literature that would support either a relation between the target and the extractive industry, and then either a synergy and trade-off. And then from what I remember about SDG 6, which is related to water, there are several targets that are focused on access to clean water, but then there are some others that might be less affected, or at least we did not find evidence for it, such as sanitation measures, or I don't know them all off the top of my head, but international communication for all of them. So it might be that there are some issues or some targets rather under SDG 6 that are actually really strongly implicated. But when we break them down target by target, we didn't find the evidence to support either the implied changes to achieve these targets or goals or a synergy and trade-off. So
Okay.
it's not to say that water isn't important. It's just that it wasn't one of the ones where we were able to click off several targets.
So I think that we can have more discussions on that, but for the sake of time, let me move to two questions that is actually coming from the Hoover app. It did not specify who should answer that, but I think all of us are doing LCA, so feel free to answer. So it's coming from Marcia Vlad. The first question is, LCA is actually a static photograph or image of a product or service at a given moment in time. How could be introduced, or how could it be introduced, I think, the time factor in the analysis, or how do we introduce the time factor in the analysis? So that is the first question. It's actually talking about how static LCA is. As to whether that is true or not, I leave you to share your perspectives on, and how we can introduce the time factor in there. The second one is, how can LCA be conducted for a product containing certain percentages of recycled materials? Is there already a recognized method? I do not know who wants to take the first one. Please feel free to either show by hand or just put on your mic and then provide some answers. Then we can move on to the second one. Or should I choose and pick? Yeah, Rose, please.
Yeah. So yeah, we have this differentiation in LCA that you can have an attributional LCA and you can have also a consequential LCA. As we are talking about impact, you can have this static photograph of what is attributed, what the product, the contribution of the product to a particular impact, okay? But you can also have the consequential LCA, which talks about what is the impact of this product all along, or how it affects, let's say, production patterns on models or whatever. That is just one aspect. Then, for example, if we have to, I think in some of the impact categories, the time frame has already been included in the characterization factor. For example, if we consider global warming, for example, we have global characterization factors for global warming calculated over a 100-year period, but you also have 25, you have 50. So this was an attempt anyway to consider the time frame also in LCA. That's what I can contribute for this at this point. If others have, they can chip in also. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other panelists specifically on this? Okay, let me move on to Jana, because we also making sure that at least each presenter actually gets to respond to a question. Jana, there's a question here from Leopold. Yeah. It says, I was a bit surprised to see that you find the availability and maturity of environmental information better than economic one. I would expect big data suppliers like Bloomberg to have extensive coverage on economics of products and services. Could you maybe expand on why this is the case?
Yeah,
Jana, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I already started typing, but it's easier to answer verbally. So the figure one I presented was mainly built up on an external perspective. So for example, me working at university and then working together with a company or assessing a product which gets produced by a company. Then, for example, Gabi or ZimaPro or Umberto, like tools helping doing the LCA, have a lot of data already for the LCA. But for the economic part, it's sometimes hard to get real costs. And also, if the product is not assessed together with the company, then mainly they won't share the cost because, yeah, it might be a competition with other companies. So that's the reason why it is a little less mature, we would say, than LCA.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me ask a personal question to, do we have, Stefanie is here, right? Great. Stefanie, you talked about a framework, a European sustainability framework. I am not a European, but there are the European Union has, trade partners, and you actually talked about importation into Europe. I would like to find out from you, what do you think, how do you think that this sustainability framework could impact positively or negatively on trade partners outside the European Union?
This sustainability framework is not about imports or exports. It's about the mineral extraction within the European Union or within Europe. So it's not impacting. But we are outsourcing the mineral production. And with this sustainability framework, we are promoting the mineral extraction within the European Union. That's the reason why we are doing this.
Yeah, but when you are outsourcing, depending on the policy direction, that could also impact on how those outsourced minerals are actually mined outside the European Union. Is that not it?
I'm not sure what you're meaning. I'm sorry.
So when you are outsourcing, it means that you are expecting certain minerals that is coming outside from the European Union, isn't it? Do I understand what you mean by outsourcing?
Yeah, but the project is about extraction within the European Union and not for the sourcing, but it's also important that imported raw materials are mined sustainably and responsible. So that's also a fact, but we are promoting the mineral extraction within the European Union.
Okay, very well. We have just about 4 minutes to go. There's a question here for Rose. Before we try to round up, Rose, do you see the need to break down the geographic granularity any further beyond the national level? So maybe to subnational, district, regional levels?
Yes, exactly. That is also one aspect of for future development or use of this tool. We want to work with specific site-specific data. So it will the tool needs to be refined in order to allow users to, when they zoom in, they can reach even at some mining sites or refining sites that before at that level, maybe we will have the company level. So from the company level, you can have the sites that are owned by the company, and you can collect that company specific data that allows us to have the social performance. So not hotspot, but really the social performance according to the UNEP guidelines on social life cycle assessment.
Okay, very well. 3 minutes to go. Let me ask a general question. I don't know who wants to take that. Then I come to you individually. I think now we have only 4 people that you can just give your final comments before we end the session, or before I hand over to Eleonora to end the session. So one question that came from, let me check, Messia Vlad is, how can the LCA be conducted for a product containing certain percentages of recycled materials? Is there already a recognized method? I don't know whether, Rose, you want to take that, then I can move on to others.
Yes, actually we have the fact that you in LCA, you have input and output. So if you have a recycled content, you consider it as an input to the whole system. And according to the allocation for recycling, you have different distribution. You can have at the level of giving all the credit to the producer or all the credit to the recycler. So this is a methodology which you can adopt. You then you might consider the recycled material as a waste, and then it has no burden, environmental burden, or you have a 50-50 split. It all depends on what is included. So the recycled content is an input to your product and model.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me move to Jessica. Jessica, would you like to say something to this question, or do you have a final comment that you want to make? Or maybe you spotted a question in the chat that is specific to you, or you like to respond?
So I won't comment on LCA since that is not, in fact, my specialty. I'll leave it to the experts here. There was one question about if we're going to have a specific focus on technology. And indeed, we're still writing the paper. And so now we have done all of the analysis and a lot of the background research, but we're trying to, let's say, finish it up to make the biggest impact possible. So we can consider some more potential areas to give case studies to or something like this for the final aspects of the paper. So that was a really great question. Thank you very much. But otherwise, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to present here.
Yeah, it's 2:20. Let me hand over to Eleonora. Eleonora, please.
Yeah, yeah, I think we can close the session here. And thank you very much to all of you for this really interesting session. And I wish you a nice evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.